Mesdames et messieurs, the greatest festival of our contemporary society, the Olympic Games, is about to begin.
This is going to be close.
Oh! They're all completely gassed! They've given it everything on the global bucket! Oh, yeah! No! Oh!
Brilliant. But that is an Olympic championship.
Ready?
Hello and welcome to another episode of Keep the Flame Alive, the podcast for fans of the Olympics and Paralympics. If you love the games, we are the show for you. Each week we share stories from athletes and people behind the scenes to help you have more fun watching the games. I am your host, Jill Jarris, joined as always by my lovely co-host, Alison Brown. Alison, hello, how are you?
I feel like we've had reverse exposure therapy this week
Oh,
because we were together for 2 months in Paris and then we were apart and then we got like 2 days together to like get us through. And now we're back to high on the screen.
yeah, it's weird. It's always fun spending time together in person and, we can be goofy, to be quite honest.
In different cities.
That is true. And we were goofy this past week in Atlanta. So we wanted to share a little bit about that. But first, we would like to give a shout out to all of our patrons, particularly our patron of the week, Sam Bacon. This is the time of the year when we give a shout out to our gold and committee member level patrons. And Sam is in that group. Sam got to see hockey at the 1924 stadium in Paris. And it was nice to get the report from him that it looked very 1924 on his end.
Yeah, when we were, we'll get to this in Atlanta. We were talking with some people who had been there, and I realized how many venues I didn't get to. And my goal had been to get to all the venues, and I failed miserably. But Sam did not. So I am quite jealous and quite grateful.
Yes, it was very nice to get your reports. And it's very nice that you support the show in the way that you do it and you help keep our flame alive. So, Sam, thank you so much. And if you'd like to get your name on this list, you can find out more about supporting us at flamealivepod.com/support. So, Olympin.
We went to the Olympin show. We've been there a few times. So this time it was in Atlanta, very Olympic city, which I have not been to before. You have been.
Mm-hmm.
So we set up our table and we had friends and colleagues and listeners show up, and it was an adventure.
It was. So thank you so much to listener Jessica, who stopped by and chatted with us and picked up some sweet mascots, I will tell you. I love it when somebody else loves the Snowlets from Nagano as much as I do. Even though they are now very crudely drawn mascots, they were still one of my favorites. And also listener Don and his lovely daughter came by, and it was so nice to see them. So
It was very funny because she is of that age where nothing her dad thinks is cool to her. But I appreciate her pretending I was cool. So thank you, sweetheart. That was good for the old lady's heart.
Yes, and it was nice to see Don had some flair on, showing out those Boston 2024 pins. Can you imagine what Boston 2024 would have been like? When you put it all into perspective of what actually went down and what happened, and with the pandemic, and then coming back and needing to host. I don't know.
Sometimes the IOC makes mistakes with its host cities.
Mm-hmm.
That was not one of them.
No,
And I say that with love because Boston, we both lived in Boston. I adore Boston. It's honestly one of my favorite cities in the world. And I loved living there, but that kind of event, and I'm not sure if too many of the European tourists would appreciate the Boston attitude.
No, but we did get the French way, so
That's true. Fair enough.
I mean, there were a lot of nice French people. There'd be a lot of nice Bostonians, but you'd still have a little touch of every. And I bet every city in the world has those people.
True. Fair enough. But just getting around Boston. Oh gosh. Well, what could have been. We can imagine that for
Right.
hours
Well,
for every city.
Maybe they would have actually invested in their public transportation.
Don't be silly.
Oh, but one of the things that I picked up at the Olympin show that is interesting, because one of the things that you like is the bid city stuff because of the what could have been
Yes.
element to it. And one of the things that I found was a pin. It's a button that was from the failed Chicago 2016 bid. That was the first logo that had to get replaced because they broke the rules and used a torch in it. And it was
They got Rule 40'd like we did.
I know, exactly. But it was a beautiful logo that was a torch, and in the top of the flames was the city skyline. And it was just absolutely stunning. And then the hammer came down and said, "Hey, by the way, don't you remember that you can't use the torch in your candidate city logo?" And so they had to change it to a star that was more emblematic of the stars in the city of Chicago flag. But it was very fun to be able to pick that up.
Yes, and my big find for the show was the Vancouver 2010 mittens from Team Canada with the maple leaves. I made a very good trade on that one. So my daughter took one look at those and she's like, "Oh, are those for me?" I said, "Absolutely not." I said, "Forget it. Those are mine."
As if, come on.
So now I have a Canada, a USA, and a Team Korea mitten that I can wear interchangeably, one of each if needed.
Very
so
nice.
that we don't seem biased. But yes, I seem to be collecting unintentionally team mittens, which I am here for.
And one of the things that was very nice was that listener Nicholas took us on a tour. He is a listener Nicholas of the Olympic Rings and Other Things blog. He lives in the Atlanta area. So he moved there a few months before the games, I think, and he worked in the Olympic Village. So he took us downtown. We went past the Shepherd Center, which was the hospital that was a major influencer in getting the Paralympics to Atlanta, because those were the days where cities did not have to have both games. And the Shepherd Center people thought it would be a good idea to have the Paralympics as well. That was cool. It's a huge complex. We did see a lot of trees, as is one of the things I stick on. A lot of trees that were built, or not built, a lot of trees that were planted for the games that are growing. And I will say the Peachtree Street that we went down, that went through from Buckhead, where we were, to downtown, you can see how that street is going to be very shady and very cool, fit temperature-wise, in the years to come as those trees get older and older. So that was really nice, to be quite honest.
Right. You have that legacy that's not obvious. It's not a stadium, it's a tree. And it's a tree-lined street that didn't exist before, that you would never think of as a legacy, but is so important to these cities.
Right. And the other thing that we talked about with Randall Rourke and Michael Dobbins, who were in the city planning department during Atlanta 96, and they wrote a book that we discussed a few years ago now. They talked about sidewalks as well that were installed for the games. And Nicholas said that Atlanta used to not really have much in the way of sidewalks at all. It was not a very walkable city. And that with the addition of these sidewalks, that helped people be able to get around on foot.
Right, because when I live in a neighborhood that's very suburban, no sidewalks, and you forget how important a sidewalk is until you don't have it.
Right.
And you're just trying to walk your dog without getting run over by a car. Something so simple as, walking to the corner store, you don't want to have to drive everywhere. You want to be able to, or if you don't drive, just being able to walk around a city safely is basic to city life. And Atlanta did not have a lot of sidewalks in a lot of neighborhoods.
Which I that's also an interesting legacy element of these games. We went to Centennial Park.
We went to Centennial Park. So as I said, it was my first visit to Atlanta. So my first visit to Centennial Park, I did get a little giddy, I will admit. And what a beautiful park, and how it's still so integrated into the city. I mean, it truly is Atlanta's Central Park. And the neighborhood around it is lovely, and they have the rings. Now, there's been that huge controversy of whether the rings are going to stay on the Eiffel Tower,
Right.
or they're going to be put back. The way they have it in Centennial Park, I feel like it's appropriate. So they have rings at the entrance. They're definitely smaller than the rings that were on the Eiffel Tower. So that feels like an appropriate use of keeping the rings in the city, because that Centennial Park was such a central element, and so many events, not sporting events, but they had the concerts there, and of course the bombing was there, but it feels integrated and legacy-like, not we're changing the face of our city.
Right. I would agree with you on that. And it's an element where if the IOC is letting the rings be used for former host cities, that's a great way to do it. And boy, did people take their pictures with the rings.
There was a lot of kids climbing on it. We took pictures, so we'll post some more pictures of us in the rings, but the kids really love it, and clearly children who were not alive in '96. They're
Right.
I'm like, "Were your parents alive?" I mean, these were very, very young children, but it's still, like we were saying, so integrated to the city. We did see all the bricks. It was in the evening, so we couldn't find anyone's particular brick, but I can see that being just a fun thing to do, find your brick, where it was
Right.
engraved with your name or whatever you had it engraved with. The fountain, unfortunately, is being refurbished, so we had to look through the fence
Mhm.
like criminals to see it. But we did see the Billy Payne statue. He was the guiding force behind this, and a Pierre de Coubertin statue, which was
Yes.
very interesting because, most of the Pierre de Coubertin memorials and statues and images are very static, whereas this, he was walking up steps and
Mhm.
in motion, and I liked that different imagery. It also felt very Atlanta in a way, that kind of motion, because I think of '96 as being an Olympics with a lot of movement to it. And I don't know why that image, maybe just because it was not an elite level it was kind of a smaller city, it was kind of trying to make a comeback, it was a different kind of games, and that movement really spoke to what they were doing in that with those games.
And with that statue, one of the people behind making sure it got built was TKFLASTANI George Herthler, who we did see at the show. He showed up and made the rounds and talked to everybody. And he is working on a movie that we will talk about at some point in the future. It's getting close to done. So that was fun to catch up with him and also see the statue because I remember talking about it with him. It's a nice statue.
And speaking of statues, we saw one of the statues that has damage from the bombing that they left
Yes.
with the damage. It's not significant. It's kind of just like small little holes or scrapes. And of course they left it, which I'm glad they did. I'm glad they didn't repair it. So that piece of the Atlanta story is there. And there's also a memorial, a stone in the park. But that little piece was so vivid to say, wow, and you could see how far away it was from where the bombing happened. And it's like, wow, that sent shards so far away, and how frightening that must have been, and how packed that space must have been.
Right. Near that area is also a memorial to Richard Jewell, who was instrumental in getting many people away from where the bomb was and causing fewer fatalities and less harm. He was pretty vilified during the whole incident of trying to figure out who was the bomber, and life was pretty ruined. And as he was raked through the coals in a very early episode of what 24-hour news cycles can do, because that was still a relatively new thing at the time, and this was one of the first big cases of, "Hey, we have something that we can cover," and, the constant press outside your door element of that and what the investigations did to his life and family, and subsequently was found to be exonerated from it, as we found in our book that we read for book club, The Suspect. So that was it. It's a beautiful memorial, and it's got a fountain water element to it as well. The park is kind of organized, as Nicholas said, in quilts because quilting was one of the big themes of the South and the games, and I do remember some elements of quilting going on as well. But you've got the list of the quilts that
Yes,
are in the
so
park.
it's Quilt of Dreams, Remembrance, Origins, Olympic Spirit, and Nations.
And the nations quilt we went under, there's a like a pergola thing, and they've got all of the flags of the nations that were at these games there, and flags that don't exist anymore. We had a lot of fun trying to guess what the
I'm
flags were.
still trying to figure out what that torch flag was.
Oh, yeah.
I'm still doing an image search. So there was, and Nicholas, listener Nicholas, tried to test you on flag knowledge, and I told him not to do that, and he found out what happens when you try to test Jill on a flag and tell her she's wrong. She's not wrong. Jill is never wrong when it's a flag.
Except for we're still working on Africa. I'm still working on some of the African flags. There's a lot of green, yellow, and red in Africa. But it was fun to see what the flags were, especially for former Soviet countries that were at their first summer games, basically. Yeah. No, yeah, because they were unified in 92, and then they were separate countries in 96, and so we had different flags that would eventually morph into what their flags became that we know now. So that's really fun to see, and to see all of the, I mean, it was a huge explosion in the number of nations that year just because of all of the turmoil politically that had happened in the world and all of these new countries that came to being.
All the stans.
That's right. All the stans made their stand. So yeah, it's a really beautiful park. It's big. It's a pretty big space for downtown. Still used a lot. There's a lot of beautiful flower gardens and elements that it's just kind of a please wander through me park and discover something new.
And there were a bunch of kids playing football in the corner. There were a lot of families walking through. So again, what a beautiful legacy for the city to have this very loved, very well used park that didn't exist. And from what Nicholas was telling us, it really transformed that whole area of downtown. So the legacy is not just the White Elephant stadiums, right? There can be a lot of other pieces that can change a city for the better.
Right. And Nicholas was also telling us about some of the village stuff because the village was pretty close to that at Georgia Tech. Apparently, when those buildings were built, Georgia Tech did not want them when they were done. So Georgia State took them over. And that was kind of a longer hike for those students because Georgia State was about a mile away or so. And eventually, Georgia State built some more buildings, and Georgia Tech needed those buildings back.
They said, oopsies, we would like those back, please.
So yeah, so
probably the only time that Tech and State had a gentleman's agreement that went smoothly.
And then we went over to where the Cauldron is now. The Cauldron is
next to a highway in a parking lot.
Yeah. Putting it nicely.
It's supposed to be so that you can see it when you're driving on the major highway around Atlanta. Great. But to see it up close, you really can't, because if you pull into this parking lot, the way it's situated, you really can't get a view of it. So the only way to see it is from the highway.
Yeah, it is kind of weird because it's built with all of these stairwells around it. So supposedly you could have gone to the top. And then there is a steel structure that goes across the highway that has the Olympic rings. And Nicholas had said no, that walkway, stairway never opened. So you could never, ever go to the top. It was safety reasons. Probably a good idea since it's America. But it really now obscures the Cauldron. But the funny thing about the Cauldron is that during 1996, it was pretty vilified as looking like a French fry container. I didn't think it looked that bad in person.
In person, you could see more of the texture of the metal, I think, or it was terracotta. I'm not sure, but it wasn't paper, obviously, or cardboard. But in a photograph, it looks like cardboard. So it's definitely, people need to think more about how it looks in photographs, because most people see these things in photographs and on video, not in person.
Right. According to an article in the Toronto Star, the Cauldron is red painted stainless steel. So yes, it just looked different in person. And I think that when you see some of the pictures of the opening ceremony, especially that area through the Cauldron, and you had that McDonald's right behind it. Do you remember those pictures?
So that tricks your brain into making that connection.
Yes.
And then the flames sort of have that color of French fries. So Once again, somebody needs to get a 12-year-old boy to check these designs
Right.
because they will see it.
So the cauldron is in the parking lot that was pretty much the baseball stadium. It was the baseball stadium. And the baseball stadium did get torn down after a while because the Braves wanted to move to the suburbs. And the stadium, Olympic Stadium, is now the home of Georgia State University. So they had a football game that day. So it's still getting used on the regular. And that was really cool. Listener Nicholas also said that if you were going down the street that's right by the cauldron, which I believe is Capitol Avenue Southeast, that was known as Olympic Way during the games. And they had some signage. There's a couple of those signs left. A lot of them disappeared after the games. And there are also different cauldrons along the street here and there that still exist and were just kind of design elements that paved the way and made it feel more Olympic. So yeah, and we saw most of this stuff at night too, which made it hard to like stop and get out and walk around and
But we still did. The only place I would be concerned about the stopping and walking around is where the cauldron is, because you really are just pulling into a Georgia State parking lot that says, sticker B only, and it has a gate. So while we were there, I kept keeping an eye on that gate, thinking some security guard is just going to lock us in there. And we'll be sleeping in the car.
After my time at the University of Utah, I am also very paranoid about parking in any sort of college lot anymore. But we got away with it. So it was good. It was a fun little tour to see what is still there over 25, 35 years later. So that's really cool. Thank you so much, Nicholas, for that. And sharing some of the legacy that still exists, even though the games get further and further in the past.
Yeah, all those children and their parents don't remember it.
So we'll post some stuff in the show notes about learning more about Atlanta's Olympic legacy. The Atlanta History Center, which we talked about a couple years ago, has a really nice exhibit on the games, and they've got a lot of stuff on their website that has like a tour of the area if you want to learn more. Holidays are coming up.
And you know what? It makes a perfect gift. Books. Here, you want to know why books make a perfect gift? Okay, because books are so easy to wrap.
Yes.
They're square and they're solid and they're easy to wrap. And they don't have to be Olympic books. They can be any book at all, and you can get them all and help the show and support independent bookstores through our link for bookshop.org.
Yes, so that's bookshop.org/shop/flamealivepod. Anything you buy through that link. We have a number of curated lists, but you don't have to buy any of those. You can buy any kind of book there and support the show financially. That goes to keeping our flame alive, which we are really getting into the doldrums, the post-Paris boom. People are either still catching up on shows or they've declared bankruptcy and they've said we'll see you in Milan. We need to keep our flame alive financially and be able to support the operating costs of this podcast through the next couple of years at least. So yeah, a lot of books. We will be having book club in a couple of weeks. Maybe you want to get Today We Die a Little by Richard Asquith, which isn't, well, I'm not going to, it's a good book. It really is. Forward promote.
Spoiler alert.
I know,
it's good.
I know. We had some good books this year for book club, so you might want to check that out. That is bookshop.org/shop/flamealivepod.
C'est mauvais.
Way. Remember that incident with the coaches on the Canadian soccer team who filmed Team New Zealand's practices with drones?
I do remember, and I remember that was not a good choice that they made.
Not a good choice. So Canada Soccer has now released a report, names redacted in there, but it had commissioned a report about this whole big incident, and they found that this was not a one-off. This had been going on for a couple of years. There's some indication that coaches may have objected to the practice, but yet allowed it to continue. So in light of that fact, head coach Bev Priestman, assistant coach Jasmine Mander, and Joseph Lombardi, who was the drone filmer. They've all been fired. Canada Soccer also looked into the men's team practices and found potentially unethical behavior involving drones, but noted that they took pictures, or they used a drone to take some shots, supposedly just things to use for social media. They didn't find any footage of practices for other teams on those drones. So that was one of the things that they noted there. But the team's head coach also did not approve of using drones to film anything as well. So hopefully this will be a closed book on this situation and a lesson to others.
What were you thinking, Canada?
Very not cool. Thank you to Rich Perlman at the Sports Examiner for the follow-up on that. We had an email from listener Patrick, not Patrick from Chicagoland, another Patrick, whom we had to figure out how to identify. So, Patrick, if you have some ideas.
Other Patrick.
Yeah, and we don't want to call you Other Patrick. He wrote in response to our discussion of opening ceremonies a couple of weeks ago and how we said the send was a little bit too big and they should scale it back. And he said no.
No, he objected to my ceremony arms race comparison and said big, better, and even bigger is better.
Yes. And it's nice. He said, as a child of the 90s and aughts, the ceremonies arms race, some of my earliest memories of the Olympics were of the bigger and bigger spectacle of each games. I will grant that some of the forerunner before my time ceremonies like LA 84 and Seoul 1988 had iconic moments. But to me, Sydney through London is the golden age of Olympic ceremonies. And as someone who's not inclined to watch sports ball on a random Tuesday, they were my gateway drug into the wider world of the games. To be frank, I don't think I've ever watched the Olympics, let alone grown up to be a super fan who spends his life savings on Olympic trips, if I hadn't been dazzled by the ceremonies first. And then he goes, every ceremony from Sochi onward has been a series of diminishing returns and increasingly underwhelming, culminating in Beijing 2022's triumphant disappointment with the cup holder snowflake cauldron lighting, which is really the worst. It really was the worst.
It really was. So I don't think we'll ever be that disappointed. I hope we are never that disappointed again.
I know. And I will say Sochi, the thing that will forever stick out in my mind of Sochi is when the rings did not open.
When the rings didn't light up and then they switched it for the rebroadcast.
Yeah, you don't want to have a ceremony that you remember only for the big mistake, to be quite honest. So,
though I don't feel bad that Russia's ceremony is remembered for the big mistake, considering what has happened since.
Very true. So Patrick continues by saying the Seine River ceremony, by contrast, was exactly the re-injection of energy that the ceremonies have needed for over a decade now. It was also the first ceremony I got to see in person with my own eyeballs, so I'm definitely biased. But there's not a day gone by since that event that I haven't thought about that incredible, rainy, miserable, wonderful night, which is very cool. I do have to say that's, when a ceremony sticks with you like that, it is magical.
I can't argue with that.
Right.
So and in response, I will say yes. Paris, if they had a better editor, would have been perfect.
Yeah, and that outside the box thinking. So Patrick does want to see more outside the box ceremonies going forward. You got a little Roman Colosseum going on for Milan Cortina. What are they going to do with that? You've got 2 stadiums for LA 2028. What are you going to do? So, nice little thing he said. Opening ceremonies at their best are there to inspire the world, spread a message of peace through sport, and inspire the next generation of Olympic fans. And above all else, each opener sets the tone for its games, a host country's showcase of its culture and a love letter to the world. The more glamorous the opening night, the more energized the public is for the event to come. Okay, rant over.
Well, I loved your rant, Patrick. Thank you so much for writing in. And if you would like to write into us to tell us how wrong we are, you can find us at flamealivepod@gmail.com. And I don't disagree with him.
No, I don't.
The best opening ceremonies, whatever best means to you, is what sticks. Like, I still remember Lillehammer. And the elves coming out of the ground and the royal family showing up in the sled. When an opening ceremony is good, it is magical is the absolute word. London, probably the best we've seen.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And you're right. You get the public energized. They're excited for the games. You're excited for the next couple of weeks. And I don't think I'll ever forget the way the crowd across the river reacted when Celine Dion came out, and just the enthralled sound that came from them. It was pretty magical. It made sitting in the rain less miserable than it was. And the fact that we were watching on TV by that point. So that was a lot less miserable, just with some of the really cool things that Paris did. So yeah, I'm with you though. A little editing would have helped, but they did okay with that out of the box.
Milan has got to do a better cauldron. I mean, the Italians cannot fail at a cauldron. Come on. Come on. Sono bellissimi.
Ooh, ooh. Speaking of Italy, we have something that have they failed on this? Who knows? The look of the games and the pictograms are out. So the look is called the vibes, and the vibes are creativity, energy, imagination, passion, and style. I would also say the vibes are the illest. I think that's a drop from another podcast I listened to. And so in this look, the common thread between the vibes is the human gesture. And that look you'll see throughout what the stadiums will look like. This energy and creativity through the lines in the swooshes, I guess, that you will
I
see
know
around the
I
stadium.
kept calling it swooshy, but it's
Yes.
so funny that you're reading about the common thread because like the common thread is thread. Like there are those very soft flowing lines through the pictograms and the look of banners and the things that they've displayed. I said, "How do you make wind on a banner?" And they did it.
Yes, so they have curved shapes that evoke movement, straight lines that intersect to give dynamic momentum, and a blur effect in shades of white to recall snow and winter. And we talk about the human gesture. Both of us, even though we don't have video, we're both gesturing very frantically as we try to talk about
We're
these.
making swooshy hand motions because it's so swooshy.
Right. The pictograms are inspired by athletes' trajectories. And we talked a bit about this at the Olympin show. Listener Jessica was by, and she had a really good quote. She said, "The pictograms aren't just art, it's functional." And it's very important how functional they are. And so the these are kind of line drawings of the sports and the athlete that is doing the sport. So we are back to human elements in the pictograms. Paris decided not to have humans in them and used the sporting elements, but now we're back to humans, and they're kind of line drawings that almost look like ice skating figures, I would say,
Because they're
to me.
swooshy.
Yeah, because they are swooshy.
What's Italian for swooshy?
We will find out. Il swoosho. I'm like Emil Zatopek. I'm teaching myself Italian languages. But me, I'm making it up, not looking at a dictionary. Another forward promo. What do you think of these?
I wanna see them big and small.
Okay.
Because one of the big problems that we had in Paris, or with the Paris pictograms, that Tokyo we did not have this issue, was when they were very small, it was very hard to see what they were.
Mhm.
They looked pretty big, they looked beautiful on a T-shirt, but in that functional thing like Jessica was talking about, on a computer screen, which they use the pictograms to, navigate on their computer program, made it very difficult.
Yeah. I am interested to see what that look like as well. I like them because they are different from previous pictograms.
I think they look Italian.
They do look Italian, and because of the fact that they're a line drawing, in a way, they remind me a little bit of Lillehammer, and maybe because I saw a lot of Lillehammer stuff, and those were very, very different looking pictograms in that they were going for that lore and, mythology of Norway, and you had, I don't wanna say rustic, but maybe runic-like pictograms. These have a different, like, Italian style, but they're swooshy, and they are evoking something different that we haven't seen in the games before, I think.
Let's see. I think they're going to look gorgeous big because of that movement and the clean lines. Let's see how they do small. That's my concern.
Yes.
That's always my concern with the pictograms that Tokyo succeeded so well at with those geometric figures. Those blew up well and they shrunk well.
Yes. Well, Tokyo created the pictograms, so you have that
Yeah.
as well. The Vibes also have ambassadors on social media.
Of course they do.
Yes. So according to Design Boom, for creativity, you have pianist, author, and producer Dardust, also known as Dario Fini. Energy is wheelchair fencer Bebe Vio. Imagination is comedian and author Federico Basso. Passion is chef David Oldani. And style is Etoile of La Scala Theater. So we'll see how the ambassadors embody their vibe over the next year and a half.
I wonder what connection there is between the vibe and the flow, that sort of sub mascot that they have.
That's a good thing to look for.
Does the flow have the vibe?
I don't know. But the mascots, Milo and Tina, will be unveiling their official sport poses on social media every day until November 25th.
Alpine skiing came out today, and it's adorable.
Come on. These are cute ones. These are
These are
really,
good ones.
really
These are-
cute mascots.
These are cute, kid-friendly. I think they will fit through doorways better than some of the more recent ones.
They
They'll
might
just
be
have
too
to
tall.
duck.
Yeah,
They'll have to duck, but they won't have to get squished. Like poor Bing Dwen Dwen and Shui Ron Ron from just getting their heads crushed to fit through a doorway.
But yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing more of Milo and Tina, and I'm looking forward to seeing what they look like in person. Oh man. Oh man, are we having situations in Brisbane? I will say that.
Can't all be flow and vibes in the Olympic world.
No, and again, maybe I awarded the games a little too early. Maybe. There were some elections in Australia. The Liberal National Party is now in charge of the Queensland government, taking over from Labor, I believe. They are not thrilled with the amount of spending that's been going on in the games. And they talk, the Australian turn has been blowout. And that to me, just, I cannot, it's been hard to put blowout with over budget in my brain. So,
okay, so those of us who have ever had a baby, blowout has a completely different meaning. However, considering what happens to Olympic and Paralympic budgets, I think it is fitting.
I think so too. So Sky News is reporting that Brisbane 2032 is having budget problems for many of its Olympic projects. There is a new review committee that is going to look at spending, and they will do that over the next 100 days. Already, 3 of their projects, the Sunshine Coast Indoor Sports Center, the Chandler Indoor Sports Center, and the Sunshine Coast Stadium, have been blown out by 180 million Australian dollars. Brisbane Arena, which was a 2.5 billion Australian dollars project, is now 500 million over budget. And that's covered by the federal government. 500 million, no small chunk of change. And this is a stadium project that's going over a train yard. So it's going to be complicated already, and now it's getting more complicated by being over budget. The government doesn't want to provide any extra Olympic funds. And yes, this committee that they want to put into place is going to review costs and bring them under control. And looks like there's going to be no more new stadiums, including a refurbishment of the GABA, which was a big deal. So not a good situation going on in Australia.
So to our Australian friends, give us some scuttlebutt that we don't hear back in the States, because, like the too early is definitely a possibility, though LA seems to be doing well with spreading out its costs, using that extra time to kind of spread some things out.
And
I
maybe,
hope.
well, LA also went in with, we are not building anything. We don't have to build anything. And I think we had some ideas in Brisbane, which may not have the most infrastructure for games, even though they had the Commonwealth Games not that long ago. I don't know if they just don't have enough infrastructure for an Olympics, which is a lot bigger than the Commonwealth Games? Or is this another, we see an opportunity to build stadiums and
Yo,
say that
Gabba
they're needed? I don't know. When we were talking with Ben Waterworth from Off the Podium, he has said that the GABA really needed to be refurbished.
We'll
And
see.
I don't know. Hopefully they don't have just a white elephant sitting there, because even the Cricket League, I think, pulled out of using the stadium. So I don't know. Yeah. Let us know what's going on. So not quite IOC news, but we've got some interesting news from the Association of National Olympic Committees, also called ANOC. They just had a General Assembly and signed a sponsorship deal with Chinese sportswear brand Peak Sport to provide free NOC uniforms to NOCs who had 6 athletes or less at Paris 2024. So if you're a tiny NOC, over the next 8 years, you will be getting free uniforms for your contingent from Peak Sports, courtesy of ANOC. And that's going to run until the end of 2032. NOCs will also get a discount on uniforms for continental and regional games, should they need those for that. It's a $7.1 million deal. Ensure that up to 72 of the smallest national Olympic committees have access to decent uniforms and could put more of their budget towards sport.
I mean, that's a significant number of NOCs.
That is.
That's no joke. And this will help a lot of those 2-athlete teams compete.
Right, because you can't necessarily negotiate any kind of deal. You're going to pay retail. And it's
And if we're talking about the smaller, poorer nations to begin with, which is usually the case in this situation, that's a lot of money coming out of their budget.
Right. And how much kit do you need to provide somebody to represent yourself well as an NOC at a games? And it's got to be helpful when you've got all these athletes who are doing like unboxing videos of all the stuff that they got, and you're the poor NOC who's like, I'm sorry, we can't give you that. It's tough. So hopefully this will be helpful, and we thought it was just interesting to share that this is stuff going on kind of in the background to help smaller countries have a more level playing field on the stage.
Welcome to TKFLASTAN.
It is the time of the show where we check in with our team, Keep the Flame Alive. These are past guests and listeners of the show who make up our citizenship of our very own country, TKFLASTAN.
Track cyclist Mandy Marquardt was one of the recipients of the Penn State Lehigh Valley 2024 Alumni Achievement Award.
Erin Shane is launching a new career group coaching program called LAND, and you can find out more about it on her LinkedIn page. We'll have a link to that in the show notes.
And Andrew Marinus will be at Books by the Banks in Cincinnati this Saturday to moderate a session called Lives Lived, Stories to Tell, which features 3 nonfiction authors. This will be at 10:30 a.m. November 16th at the main library. We will have a link to more information in the show notes as well.
And that is going to do it for this episode. If you've been to Atlanta recently or lived there, let us know what you think about the city and its Olympic legacy.
And we do love hearing from you. You can chat with us and other listeners on our Facebook group, Keep the Flame Alive Podcast. Email us at flamealivepod@gmail.com. The voicemail and text line is always open. That's 208-352-6348, 208-FLAME-IT. If you need more Olympics and Paralympics in your life, and who doesn't, you can sign up for our newsletter at flamealivepod.com. And we'll also have a link to that in the show notes.
Next week, we will be back with more stories and news from the Olympics and Paralympics. Thank you so much for listening. And until next time, keep the flame alive.